It's been a parade of powerful and wealthy people all on their way to interrogation and detention. No charges yet, but allegations of bribes for major urban construction projects, illegal development of historic sites, document forgery and multi-million-dollar cash and gold transactions. Suspects include the general manager of the state Halkbank, the mayor of Istanbul's Fatih district, prominent business people, and the sons of at least 3 cabinet ministers.
This would be a serious blow to the government because their image has always been that they've been the cleanest party.
Turkish Prime Minister Tayyip Erdogan responded angrily to the corruption probe, calling it a dirty operation by gangs within the state.
The first reaction from the government side has been to suspend the 5 senior police officers most closely involved in the corruption investigation, some of them working from this headquarters behind me. According to the official statement, they're now accused of malpractice.
And since then, media reports say the government suspended a total of at least 40 police for, it says, abusing their power. Something else is going on in Turkey, alongside allegations and counter-allegations of corruption. That something else is the movement led by this man, Muslim leader Fethullah Gulen, who's lived in exile in the United States since 1999. His education foundation has helped Turkish influence around the world and built him a respected power base at home. His movement, Hizmet, used to back the ruling AK Party. Columnist Aslı Aydın explains many of Fethullah Gulen's former students joined the police and judiciary, extending his influence. Now that relationship with the government has broken down.
This was an alliance between Gülenists and it was a power alliance of some sort, and now it's a power struggle. Whether or not this is a fight for reform or democracy is something else.
Only a careful analysis of the evidence will prove if these prosecutions are politically motivated or not. And it looks like there's a lot more evidence and scandal to emerge. Anita McNaught, Al Jazeera, Istanbul. Between 30 to 40 people remain detained for questioning in Turkey's high-level corruption investigation. No one has yet been charged. Evidence is being drip-fed to the public by Turkish police. This video was taken in the bedroom of the general manager of major state financier Halkbank. It shows $4.5 million hidden in shoe boxes, supposedly destined for illegal payments. Hours after the video was released, Turkish pranksters left a pile of empty shoeboxes outside a branch of Halkbank in Izmir. The investigation's proving as entertaining as it is disturbing. But Turkey's Prime Minister is not amused, and his deputy claims the inquiry is an attempt to discredit the government.
The government moved fast, suspending more than 40 senior police officers across the country who'd been involved in the corruption probe. The most senior of them so far, Istanbul's police chief, whose office was here. Hüseyin Çapkın's departure statement merely said he'd served his state and its people faithfully.
Pro-government media claims the police and judiciary are being influenced by this man, Fethullah Gulen, a Muslim leader, philosopher and scholar who commands an international following and great respect in Turkey and overseas. He's denied any role in the investigation. Columnist İhsan Yilmaz, who writes for pro-Gulen newspaper Zaman, says the case should be assessed on its merits, not on rumour.
We should look at the evidence. And if the evidence is not conclusive enough, then we can start asking questions about the ulterior motives of these prosecutors.
This investigation's brought out into the open the rivalry between the 2 most influential Islamic blocs in Turkey. The Gulen movement and the government used to be allies. That's over now.
Basically, what we're watching is a soccer game of some sort. Don't forget that this is a power struggle at the end of the day. It's been in the works for some time, been quite hush-hush for about 2 years.
These are stills of what police say they found at the house of the son of the Interior Minister, including a logbook with $3 million worth of transactions. After 11 years in power, the government's reputation's being tested like never before. Anita McNaught, Al Jazeera, Istanbul.
Hours after 3 senior cabinet ministers resigned over a corruption scandal, Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan announced a major cabinet reshuffle replacing 10 of his ministers.
Some of the ministers have asked to resign because of the ongoing developments, and some of them quit as they will contest mayoral elections, and some of the changes are my judgment.
Earlier, Interior Minister Muammer Güler and Economy Minister Zafer Çağlayan resigned with little fanfare. But the departure of Environment Minister Erdogan Bayraktar was very different, one that exposed deep divisions in the government. Bayraktar decided to announce his resignation on live television during an interview with local network, and he went on not only to criticize Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan, but also asked him to resign, a call the Prime Minister chose to ignore. Police are investigating allegations of illicit money transfer to Iran and bribery for construction projects. Many believe the scandal stems from a power struggle between Erdogan's government and this man, the influential US-based Muslim cleric Fethullah Gülen, who is said to have many followers within the Turkey's police and judiciary. The government dismissed dozens of police officials who were either involved in the investigation or thought to be linked to Gülen.
The government, in this case, is in internal turmoil. Such a step is unprecedented, unexpected, and one can only speculate that this will shatter the ground under Erdogan even more.
During the AK Party's 11-year rule, this is the first time 3 ministers have resigned. The one who also asked the Prime Minister to resign was a close friend of his. For some, this is the first crackdown in the government. And main question is whether Erdogan's popularity will be affected ahead of 2 coming elections in 2014. Işıl Sarıyüce, Al Jazeera, Istanbul.
Let's go back to our top story on the Turkish ministers' resignations. We're hearing that 2 ministers have now resigned. Işıl Sarıyüce joins us with the latest from Istanbul to tell us, Işıl, what the ministers are saying about their resignation.
It's a busy and important morning in Istanbul because, as you already mentioned, 2 of the ministers resigned from the cabinet, and their sons were involved in a corruption probe which erupted last week. Their sons were among 24 high-level people who were under investigation, and the economy minister Zafer Çağlayan, who resigned, designed the probe as a dirty setup. He said, "I have resigned from my post of economy minister to help the truth come out," and he said he wanted to foil this ugly plot, which he said impacted my child and my close working colleagues. And in fact, it was an unexpected step because since the corruption erupted last week, Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan was quite defiant. He was coming from Pakistan last night, and he welcomed by cheerful crowds. And he said, in the airport, he said, "I am standing with my ministers." But also there were calls from the public for the ministers to resign because, for example, Interior Minister, who was one of the ministers which resigned already, is on top of the police department, who is in charge of that investigation. And people were saying that it would shed a shadow on the investigation. And I have to mention that the resignations came 8 days later since the investigation erupted. So the Interior Minister already reassigned or more than 100 police who were in charge of that investigation.
Right.
And some people at least think that it's already a bit late for the ministers to resign.
Okay, Işıl, thank you. That's Işıl Sarıyüce reporting from Istanbul on the resignation of 2 ministers from the government. Turkey's prime minister reshuffles his cabinet after a corruption investigation rattles his government. He insists the probe is politically motivated and backed by international interests. Caught in a scandal and with elections on the horizon, Recep Tayyip Erdogan and his party are in a fight for their political lives. This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Darine Abougaida. It's a wide-ranging corruption scandal that's engulfed the highest levels of the Turkish government. And now, Turkey's Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan has replaced 10 cabinet ministers after the 3 who were implicated in corruption resigned. Erdogan had long ago announced the cabinet was due for a reshuffle, but it hasn't stopped talk of a deepening crisis at the heart of the government, one that Erdogan is failing to control. Well, of the 3 ministers to quit, this man right there, he's the Environment Minister, Erdogan Bayraktar, and he has the potential to hurt the Prime Minister the most. Despite being Erdogan's longtime ally, he refused to go quietly, saying the Prime Minister should follow suit. But the Prime Minister insists his government is clean and dismissed the corruption allegations as part of a conspiracy.
The reason our party has been successful, the reason we took the helm and we've been ruling the country for 11 years is because of our honesty, our commitment to the country and our determination to fight against corruption. The AK party does not overlook nor tolerate corruption. Should it do that, it would be removing its raison d'etre. We are facing an attack against the Turkish people and the Turkish Republic, which is presented as a corruption probe. Everybody is aware that this is not a corruption probe, but it's an obvious conspiracy, a setup against Turkish politics and its people.
But that message didn't satisfy a lot of people in Istanbul. Instead, they held protests in parts of the city and they were met with tear gas and water cannon when riot police tried to disperse the crowds. Let's bring in our guests to discuss this. In Istanbul, we have Yavuz Baydar. He's a columnist with today's Zaman, Turkey's English language newspaper. Also in Istanbul is Özgür Unluzarşikli. He's the Ankara office director of the German Marshall Fund. And in Ankara, Galip Dalay. He's a researcher at the SETA Foundation in Turkey. Thanks very much for being with us on Inside Story, gentlemen. Özgür, over to you first. In this cabinet reshuffle we saw after the resignation of 3 senior government ministers, does this ease some pressure off Erdogan and the allegations of corruption that are surrounding him and his party?
It doesn't ease the pressure for 2 reasons. First of all, it came a little bit late. If the resignations had come just after the probe started, they would have been more meaningful. And second, there's an impression among the society that actually what we have seen is the tip of the iceberg, and people think that there is more to the story.
Galip, I suppose we should make clear that the cabinet reshuffle, in fact, had been a long time coming and was announced before this whole scandal did break out. But let me ask you about the Environment Minister who resigned and with his resignation calling for Recep Tayyip Erdogan to step down himself. How much pressure does that add on Erdogan? And could this be one of the first calls of many to come for his resignation?
Well, I mean, yesterday he uttered some strong words, but today he also backtracked on these words. He said that, he has been friends with Erdogan for 40 years. Therefore, he will remain serving, he will remain serving this party and this movement in other capacity. So therefore, that didn't create a big pressure within the party. But for the time being, we don't know whether there will be some more resignation. It might be a few more, but I personally don't expect to be a big number.
Yavuz, the newspaper that you write for, Zaman, must be keeping a very close eye on these allegations of corruption going on. We understand there are 3 different investigations, allegations of corruption that include money laundering, include bribery, gold smuggling as well. I mean, is the issue of corruption being addressed properly by Erdogan?
The public perception obviously is important, and at the end of the day, I think the public perception will not be positive in Erdogan's favor, because first of all, the files, the three-pronged investigation is about more than $100 million. Second, it involves his 4 ministers. They have resigned now, but they're still at the issue. And the main question, of course, is that the tip of the iceberg? Do we have to see more? Is more coming? What is it? What's happening what happened on the local level in various cities, not only in Istanbul? So these questions, if we look at the past 8 days of performance of Erdogan, have not been addressed properly.
Let me ask you, Yavuz,
you
talk about him not addressing properly. Have you seen Erdogan defend the minister's innocence at all from your coverage?
Well, there wasn't really a defense of the ministers per se. That was done rather promptly, quickly, and the resignations was issued by the official Gazette this morning. And the Gazette also said that one of the ministers, who had yesterday protested in a manner that he asked for the resignation of Prime Minister as well, was taken from duty, not had resigned. So this is an issue also that needs to be addressed. The reshuffle includes this portion, which I think the entire public will focus on, rather than the ordinary reshuffle that was expected. The overshadowing of this corruption case, and also there's a second corruption case which is underway, which has been blocked by a row between the prosecutors and the police. And altogether, I think will cast a very thick, dense shadow over the the coming weeks up until the local elections.
We're going to certainly talk about not only the local elections, but the presidential elections a little later on. But Özgür, if I can ask you, why do you think that the 3 different investigations, the 3 different operations were all sort of carried out on the same day and announced on the same day?
Well, I could only speculate about this because there is no public information about why they are bundled together. But what we understand is there has been this investigation going on for 2 years. So there are 2 years of accumulated evidences. And it might be the case that the people who were carrying out the probe have seen that there were linkages between these 3 cases that today look separate to us.
Galip, what do you make of that?
Well, I mean, here we come to the political aspect of this corruption case. So, I mean, for sure there is the judicial aspect of this corruption case, and it should go as far as it goes, and it should it should not make any discrimination about anyone in any positions. No matter at what position a person is, if he's found guilty of corruption, he should bear the consequences. He should totally bear the consequences. But this is the judicial aspect. When we talk about the bundling the 3 of these cases into one file, we come to the political aspect. Here is the part of the Gülenist movement, which is headed by the Fethullah Gülen himself, is an Islamic cleric. He's the operation against the government. This is not we should see in a context that came after the grammar schools debate, that came after the the threat of leaking the sex tapes.
Okay, so then what you're saying, right, you mentioned Gülen, and rightly so, but so what you're saying is that you agree with what Erdogan has said, that this is a target, the government is a target of an international plot?
Well, it doesn't have to be international plot. I mean, it is mainly, I mean, in my judgment, and it's not just my judgment, it's the main perception among, columnists in Turkey. It's not just among the government circles. You have, from the liberal circles like Rushan Çakır up until, previously arrested journalists such as Ahmet Şık, Nedim Şener. None of these people sees this as a, corruption case per se. They see it it's politically motivated corruption case. I mean, there is a corruption aspect to this, but the reason that it has been bundled 3 together, and the fact that it has been leaked only months before the election, is because it's politically motivated. I mean, a month ago we had this debate in Turkey about the closure of the grammar schools. And during these grammar schools, if you look at the Twitter account of people close to the Gülenist movement, you will see all this blackmailing threat about revealing of corruption cases, the sex tapes, all those kind of things. So I mean, here is when we come to the political aspect of this issue.
All right, let's just explain to our viewers exactly who Gulen is. This corruption case is seen as part of an escalating feud between the Prime Minister and Gulen, who is his former ally. That man, Fethullah is his first name, is the leader of a religious and social movement known for its network of schools in more than 140 countries. In Turkey, Gulen followers serve in institutions that include the police, the judiciary, the media, even the AK Party itself. And the party has benefited from its relationship with Gulen, who backed its members to 3 successive election victories. But the relationship didn't last, and the rift seems to stretch back to a Gulenist prosecutor who tried to question the head of Turkey's National Intelligence Agency, who is one of Erdogan's allies. And more recently, the Prime Minister's decision to shut down Gulen-run schools was seen as a provocation. Yavuz, let me ask you this. The newspaper that you write for, Zaman, is related, as I understand, to the Gulen movement. So can you tell me if there's been a response from Gulen when it comes to allegations that he's in fact behind all of this corruption, these corruption allegations and the scandal?
Well, let me make a little distinction. I think today's Zaman in English version is people working there or writing independently from outside are much less affiliated perhaps to Gülen movement as a voluntary movement than the Turkish version. But nevertheless, the reactions, as you asked, from Fethullah Gülen was increasingly harsh in toning as the accusations from Erdogan, Prime Minister Erdogan came. So it turned into a public row at the end. There was a condemnation at the end by Fethullah Gülen about the corrupt people, intoxication of power, and how power corrupts, and they let God condemn them or in that manner. And that condemnation, that harsh condemnation, was received also as some sort of threat by Erdogan and his government. So there is clearly a row. There is clearly a very clear friction, rift between Gülen and Erdogan in person, as well as in a larger scale. Nevertheless, the evidence collected by the prosecutors since September 2012 in these three-pronged investigation was at the day of the police raids, December 17, presented privately in the morning to Prime Minister himself by the head of the Judges and Prosecutors Supreme Council, an independent judge who, according to my sources, told the Prime Minister, "We have very strong and clear evidence in this case, sir." That was the information that was given already in the early hours of the operation. So what we, I think, as media professionals from now on, as of today and tomorrow, should focus on is clearly the case. Does it hold? Does it have clear evidence? Where does it lead to? And how the government will deal with this whatever it is, tip of the iceberg or the iceberg itself. This is the main issue that should concern the entire Turkish public.
Ozgur, let me ask you if what you think Gülen, because he seems to be quite a character playing in this unfolding of the scandal. I mean, what does Gülen benefit from all of this? Because the movement, it is a movement, in fact, and not a party in Turkish politics.
Well, first of all, let me convey my thoughts about whether the Gülen movement is behind this probe. I always prefer to talk based on what I know, rather than speculating based on what I don't know. And what we all know is actually the court system, the judicial system that has initiated this probe and is proceeding this probe was actually created after the constitutional amendment in 2010, which was brought about by the ruling party itself. And actually this same judicial system tried and put into prison several people, including army generals, including professors, including members of the judiciary, etc. And I didn't hear any complaints from anyone, or I didn't hear any complaints from the ruling party at that point that the judicial system was under Gülenist influence at that point. And today, actually, we have no evidence that could tell us that the judiciary is controlled by the Gülen movement. What we also know, on the other hand, is that, as you have stated, the newspapers of the Gülen movement, intellectuals and journalists and academics affiliated with the Gülen movement, are actually very critical of the Turkish government and also the ruling party nowadays. And we can talk about a clear split between the Gülen congregation or Gülen movement or Hizmet movement, as they call themselves nowadays, and the AK party government. And what I can see is what's primary for the Gülen is this split with the AKP. And anything else seems to be secondary to the decision of splitting from the party.
Okay, so
And,
why do you think
what
that...
does the Gülen...
Right, but let me ask you why you think there's a power struggle that's going on at this particular time.
Well, there are, of course, there are different versions of the story, or there are different views to this. According to the ruling party sources, the Gülen movement wanted to share power with the AK party, and to a certain extent, the AK party shared power with the Gülen movement, but their thirst for power in the end was too much for the party. And I mean, what I have heard from someone high-ranking in the party is whatever we give them, they have asked for more. So this is the version of the AK party. The version of the Gülen movement is that actually their interests are global now rather than local. And the local political situation in Turkey is endangering their global interests. And that Turkey is actually now a detail in their power base. And if they did not distance themselves from the ruling party in Turkey, their position in other countries would be endangered. This is what I have heard from sources within the Gülen movement.
Galip, is that a valid argument? You think that they're being endangered?
Well, I mean, I don't know in what sense they are being endangered. So, I mean, like, you know, they have schools all over the world. Like, you know, in what way, like, in what sectors their interests are being endangered? For instance,
let's
like,
put
you know,
that
the
back to
business
Ozgur.
organization.
A valid question. Let's put that back to Ozgur. What sector is Ozgur?
Well, Galip, I asked the same question, actually, and the answer was yes, they have schools in some countries in which, or with which Turkey has conflicts with, like in Egypt. Now, the Gülen movement has a school in Egypt, and we know Turkey's relations with Egypt. So, if they stay close to the ruling party in Turkey, this will endanger their situation in Egypt. Or they have schools in countries...
Well, that looks like a very weak argument because, like, oh, sorry, go ahead, please.
And they have, let's say, this is what I hear, and then they have schools in other countries around the globe whose governments are actually critical of Turkey's foreign policy.
Galip, let me ask you how influential...
Can I come inside?
Sure. I'll comment, and then I'll come back to you for a question. Go ahead.
Well, sure. Well, that looks a very weak argument because, like, we know that the Gülen movement have schools like in over 140 countries. So, I mean, like, you know, if you count the number of the countries with which Turkey has problem is, like, you know, right now, like Egypt and let's say like Syria and other more countries. So, I mean, we also know that Gülen movement in Arab countries has not a huge presence as that they do have, let's say, in Central Asia. So in this regard, and plus the relationship between Turkey and Egypt got bad only after the coup, which has been, like, you know, an issue of a couple months. But the row between Gülen movement and the AK Party has been going on for a couple years. So, I mean, this is a very weak argument, I mean, to say the least. And that doesn't sound to be like a valid argument. Like, to me, the valid argument is that, it is, even though they have presence in, you know, all over the world, but their base is in Turkey. And, like, you know, their power in Turkey, like the level of power in Turkey does have a significant influence on their level of power in other countries.
All right, let me bring in Yavuz at this point. You're speaking about the power of the Gülen movement. Yavuz, just how powerful is the Gülen movement, and especially when you look into the Turkish situation, look ahead to the elections next year. Can they mobilize a lot of supporters and change the path of the elections?
To give you a simple response, there is strong enough reason to believe that Erdogan will maintain much of his power. At the moment, I spoke to yesterday 3 pollsters, 3 various different independent pollsters, and they all seem to agree that at the moment, if there was elections tomorrow, there would be 5 to 6 minus points perhaps for AKP.
Okay, but would Erdogan have won the previous 3 elections? Would Erdogan have won the previous 3 elections without the support of the Gulen movement?
Yes, he would, because the arithmetics in Turkish elections is that first party and runner-up party should have, for a single party government, should have more than 8 points. And Erdogan was clearly above 8 points, CHP, main opposition party. So that kind of arithmetics doesn't cut it. But main thing is, if this erosion continues and if Erdogan cannot take things in control, which doesn't seem to be, I think in 3 months a lot of things can happen, and there may be even more pressure from legal point of view, from law enforcement's point of view, to take action, to maybe take things more seriously and perhaps respond judiciary with respect as an independent entity, which doesn't seem to be happening right now. The more I think these attitudes in terms of going for unity of powers rather than separation of powers, which is one of the main headaches of Turkey today, disrespect for judiciary as an independent power, and putting political executive above everything, and in order to subordinate the rest, I think will backlash in the eyes of the rather wise, silent water segments of Turkey.
Özgür, do you share that view? Özgür, do you share that view? Can Erdogan survive this?
Well, he can survive this. He's a survivor, but what I know is the future of, even the near future of Turkish politics is by no means predictable. I mean, I would not venture to talk about what Turkish politics will look like in 1 year from today.
Galip, can I ask you to perhaps venture and tell us what Turkish politics would look like? What do you think will happen with the elections of next year?
Well, I mean, certainly these cases will have impact on AK Party, on the performance of AK Party, but I do think that it will not be as bad as many predicted, because the reason for that is many people does not see this case as a clean hand operation. Many people see this as a vendetta by one group against the government. So I mean, this is a very wide perception among the people. So because of that, right now, maybe many evidence is being regarded through suspicions, not only by the government circles, but with many with a wider circles. So it might have an impact on on the performance of government. And probably, I mean, the Gülen movement and people who is persuaded by those evidences might have a negative view of the government. But I personally don't expect to be a big drop in the government's election result.
And
but as
what
Özgür
about?
Said, I do agree. I mean, we will. It is highly unpredictable. I mean, especially 2014 will be highly unpredictable because Turkey is entering in an election period. There will be 3 elections in a row, so there will be many cases like that. I expect many cases like that to emerge as part of this, the struggle between the government and the Gülenist movement.
Right, and in the last 10 seconds, Özgür, let me just ask you if you think we will continue to see protests in Istanbul as we have seen.
Well, first of all, in winter, it's not likely that there will be very big protests because the weather is too cold and protesters like warm weather. That's why we had the Arab Spring rather than the Arab winter.
Right, but we did see protests against this corruption scandal, in fact. But we'll just have to leave it there on that note. We'll have to leave it there. Thanks to all my guests, Yavuz Baydar, Özgür Onluzar Şikli, and Galip Dalay. And thank you very much for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. You can always send us your feedback. You can email your thoughts to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. Thanks for watching, and goodbye for now.
It's one of the biggest challenges that Recep Tayyip Erdogan has faced in his 11 years as Prime Minister. A corruption scandal that has shaken his government and led to a reshuffle of his cabinet after 3 of his key ministers were forced to resign. But Erdogan still enjoys support and countering anti-government protests. On Friday, he addressed thousands of his followers at Istanbul's Ataturk airport.
Sovereignty does not belong to the judiciary. Sovereignty does not belong to the government either. It belongs to the people.
Elsewhere in Istanbul, although small in number, his opponents fought running battles with the police.
The police outnumbers the protesters, but the chants were very clear. Bribery is everywhere, corruption is everywhere. They simply want the Prime Minister to resign.
Police tried to break up the crowds in and around the city's iconic Taksim Square with water cannon and rubber bullets.
We do not want that man who's a traitor, thief, and walks all over Ataturk.
We want to say to him, goodbye.
This latest scandal has brought to the surface a power struggle in Turkey between the government of Prime Minister Erdogan and the leader of the Hizmet movement, Fethullah Gulen. Gulen, a Muslim scholar and preacher based in the US, is said to have big support in Turkey, including followers in the police and the judiciary. And it's widely believed that Gulen was responsible for bringing the corruption scandal into the public domain. The two men were allies in the past, but the rift between them is now threatening the country's political stability. Omar Saleh, Al Jazeera, Istanbul.
In a committee room of the Turkish parliament, shoving, shouting and a kick from a government MP aimed at this man, Justice Ömer Eminoğlu. He represents Turkish judges and was invited after the government announced it wanted more control of the judiciary. Justice Eminoğlu opposed the change, but with the MPs fighting, never got to speak.
It showed what kind of democracy, what type of system is ruling Turkey. It is not the power of the law, but the law of the powerful that is applied here. The fighting in parliament was a clear sign of this. It is a sad situation.
The wide-reaching corruption and bribery probe made public on December the 17th has the government on the defensive. It's now reshuffled around 2,000 police officers, the dislocation of chains of command, freezing the corruption investigations.
These latest changes to the justice system proposed by the government have provoked a fierce national debate. If the government manages to push these changes through, it will mean that one of Turkey's highest judicial bodies, the HSYK, the body responsible for appointing and judging judges and prosecutors, will fall completely under government control.
After winning 2010's referendum on constitutional changes, Prime Minister Erdogan said his government had made the HSYK independent. Now it's trying to roll that back. The Prime Minister says he's fighting a parallel state inside Turkey's bureaucracy. But this same group, the Gulen movement or Jamaat, helped the Erdogan government topple the power of the military in the Ergenekon coup plot prosecutions.
We are seeing a simple power struggle. Until recently, Jamaat and the government were collaborating on anti-democratic acts. But then the moment came when their interests appeared to conflict. Then they went for each other. The aim of both is to eliminate the other side. We have got a full-scale war going on.
Turkey's President Gül's trying to broker a ceasefire, meeting leaders of opposition parties. They're no fans of Jamaat Gulen either, but they don't want to give the government more power, least of all over the judiciary. The corruption prosecutions may be stalled for now, but they're still a threat to the government's reputation and political future. Anita McNaught, Al Jazeera, Istanbul. Istanbul's Grand Bazaar, where the Turks have done business for centuries and where gold is as good a currency as any. When sanctions put the squeeze on Turkey's neighbour Iran, Turkey stepped in to help. But that way round the sanctions is now the subject of a wide-ranging anti-graft investigation.
To me, this is the biggest corruption scandal in the history of the Turkish Republic. We have had previous scandals, but not this big. Implicated in this are state institutions, companies and other countries. That scale of scandal never happened here before.
Turkey and Iran worked out a way of paying for essentials like oil and gas using gold.
It worked like this. Sanctions meant Iran could not be paid using the regular global banking system or by using currency like US dollars or euros. So Turkey paid Iran using Turkish lira, which Iran then used to buy gold in Turkey in the form of gold bars, which Turkey then exported to Iran. It became a multi-billion-dollar business. Gold trading fired up the Turkish economy and ensured that supplies of Iranian gas and oil, something Turkey doesn't have, kept flowing. These clever moves helped Iran's economy stay afloat despite international pressure. And until July 2013, none of this was strictly illegal.
Whether gold trade was legal or not is not the subject of the investigation or the court case. What is the issue? While they are doing the gold trading, breaking the sanctions, Turkish officials were getting commissions, let's say bribes.
On December 17, a Turkish-based Iranian gold trader called Reza Zarrab was detained for questioning over bribery of public officials. One of them, here in the hat, was the general manager of state-owned Halk Bank. He'd managed the gold trades legitimately. The millions of dollars found in shoeboxes in his home are not so easily explained. But while the Iranian government in charge when the deals were designed has changed, the government in Turkey has not. The biggest question of all: who knew what was going on and what was it worth to them? Anita McNaught, Al Jazeera, Istanbul.
Turkey's parliament has approved a new law giving the government more control over how judges and prosecutors are appointed. The bill was passed after an all-night session. The debate sparked a brawl that left 2 politicians injured. Critics say the bill was proposed by Prime Minister Tayyip Erdogan to impede a corruption investigation. Well, Ilter Turan is a political analyst at Bilgi University and joins us now live from Istanbul. Thank you very much, sir, for being with us on the show. Now, what does this bill actually mean for Turkey's judicial service? How does it actually change things in the country?
Well, it brings 2 things. It increases the role of government in the appointment and promotion of judges and public prosecutors, and also their actions that should be independently initiated are now to be reported to administrative authorities, which gives the government an opportunity to respond. So it is generally judged to be a blow to the separation of powers that has characterized the Turkish constitutional system.
That being the case, we've seen it be a very controversial legislation. We've seen the opposition in Parliament to it in particular. How do you see this sitting with the rest of the nation?
How do I see? I did not hear the last of your sentence.
I was asking, how do you think the rest of the country will actually accept this legislation that's just been passed?
Well, actually, I don't think the action will be met with favor. The opposition will be sure to take it to the Constitutional Court. And recently also, one might remember that the Turkish Prime Minister had promised the European Union to observe the rules of the European Union as regards democratic practices. And so this is bound to generate a negative response among the opposition, both domestically, and will also put Turkey into a difficult position internationally.
Now, Mr. Turan, this legislation comes after street protests over a proposed legislation to control the internet in Turkey. Some are now accusing the Erdogan government of becoming too authoritarian after a decade in power. Is this something that you agree with?
I am inclined to think that, yes, the government is a government of highly majoritarian orientation, and appears to be of the opinion that those who get the majority should be able to exercise power in an unrestrained fashion, which actually, of course, in terms of liberal democracy, is not something that is to be approved, and it is judged to be authoritarian. And the two measures, unrelated as they may seem, are actually designed to bring under control the same phenomenon of corruption charges against the government.
Right. Mr. Turan, thank you very much for your insight. That's Ilter Turan there, political analyst at the Pilchi University in Istanbul.
Poland Çiçekli is member of Turkey's Supreme Council for Judges and Prosecutors. He's not happy with the new law passed by the Turkish parliament.
He becomes a specially authorized minister, having excessive powers over the composition of the High Council, over the members of the High Council, over judges and prosecutors. With all these changes, you got a system which puts the separation of powers into the rubbish.
Turkey's Supreme Council for Judges and Prosecutors is at the heart of a battle between the government and the Hizmet movement led by cleric Fethullah Gulen, a former ally of the Turkish Prime Minister. Gulen's followers are said to have influence over the police and the judiciary. The government blames the group for leaking a corruption scandal in December to bring down the government of the ruling Justice and Development Party. Battling the graft probe, the government sacked and reassigned thousands of police officers and prosecutors. It also introduced a new bill to restructure the Supreme Council for Judges and Prosecutors. Parliament approved it in a stormy session last week.
The government claims that the new law will end the dominance of the Gulen movement over the Supreme Council of Judges and Prosecutors in the building behind me. But that argument is infuriating the opposition, who accuse the government of destroying the independence of the judiciary. Emine Tarhan is a former judge and an MP for the biggest opposition party. She says the government wants to stifle the investigation of corruption.
A coup was carried out against the judiciary in Turkey. By laying their hand on the judiciary, they turned it into a covert silencer so that no one can raise their voices against what the government does.
But Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan is standing firm. His party denies all accusations. A senior member of the ruling party says the case is exaggerated.
The problem is not the independence of the judiciary, which is not able to stay impartial. The judiciary in Turkey is working on an ideological structuring. Our intention is only to make the council work and make the state function.
But the controversy and the power struggle is likely to go on and is only harming the image of Turkey. Omar Saleh, Al Jazeera, Ankara.
Turkey's Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan has described as fabricated a recording that appears to show him talking to his son about hiding large sums of money. The recording was briefly posted on YouTube.
The voice recordings which were put on the internet late last night have been unscrupulously fabricated. They went and made a shameless montage and released it.
Anita McNaught has more now from Istanbul.
The release of this taped material comes at an acutely sensitive point in Turkish politics, with the government facing the most serious corruption probe in the history of Turkish politics. Not only that, but there is also revelations this week that literally thousands of Turkish officials have been illegally but routinely wiretapped by Turkish police. The latest tape recordings are supposedly, allegedly, of the Turkish Prime Minister and his son. The son at home, the two of them discussing allegedly, the cover-up of the presence of large amounts of money. The government is strenuously denying these recordings, calling them a shameless montage, an immoral montage. By that they mean edit. We have no way of verifying the provenance of these videos either. Turkey is seething with allegations of wrongdoing at the moment. The corruption probe is stalled after the government shifted, reassigned literally thousands of police to new locations and positions, and did much the same with hundreds of prosecutors
prosecutors. The build-up politically is also gaining in momentum because we have local elections at the end of March, elections which are widely being interpreted as a test of the popularity and credibility of Turkey's up till now extremely popular Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Election fever's beginning in Turkey, and with more corruption allegations swirling around the government, the main opposition party, the CHP, has plenty to work with.
The Prime Minister should stop his duties and step down.
We are going through a process of dictatorship at the hands of the Prime Minister. We will stand against this. We will not be defeated. We will not give in.
After Monday's leak of audio recordings which allegedly show the Prime Minister and his son hiding millions of dollars in cash, government ministers pitched in to back up their leader, saying the recording is a fake.
It's a very clear montage. If the Prime Minister's office asks, we can check the recording technically, but it's very clear.
But the government's clearly worried, suspending the technicians responsible for providing the Prime Minister's secure phones and replacing encryption software. Meanwhile, it's winning battles in the General Assembly, defeating the opposition to pass two controversial new laws. One makes it easier for the government to shut down internet sites it doesn't like, the other gives it more control over the judiciary. Turkey's government faces a crucial year. Local and presidential elections will test if it still has the confidence of the people. But Turkey's economy has been rocked by the corruption investigations, and regaining the confidence of the international community will prove much harder, which is why Turkey's government will be happy to see this week the launch of a new English-language, pro-government daily newspaper. Critics at home and abroad say increasingly draconian measures reveal the government's weakness, not its strength, and that there's now too many accusations against the government for any cover-up to work forever. Anita McNaught, Al Jazeera, Istanbul.